Hello, everybody. Welcome again. And thank you so much for joining us in today's TPA Masterclass on developing scripted fiction podcasts. Again, I'm Amanda. I'm the Education Director here at the Podcast Academy. We are a 1,000-strong virtual community across the world. So if you're not yet a TPA member, welcome. You are one of us. Just sign up. We offer these types of programming monthly and have other programs like mentorship and also the opportunity to vote for the Ambies, which just opened. Woohoo, exciting. Please visit thepodcastacademy.com to sign up. We'd love to have you with and among us. And I will include my email address in the chat in case you have any individual questions we can answer. Lots of good stuff. And so now it's my pleasure to get started on this amazing panel discussion. I'm really thrilled to introduce you to our facilitator and TPA board member, Martha Little at the amazing Audible. Martha brings more than 25 years of audio experience to Audible as the Senior Director for Creative Development. In that role, she oversees the podcast development program, supervising the development, audio production, writing, marketing support, et cetera, to create investigative documentaries, docudramas, fiction, and nonfiction series. So thank you, Martha, for being here with us. Martha is joined by Ann Heppermann, an executive producer at Audible, who is also the founder of the Sarah Awards, which I believe the New York Times said are like the Oscars. Woohoo, prestige. Ann has been teaching audio fiction at Sarah Lawrence College in its writing program since 2011 and also hosted the fiction podcast Serendipity. Ann has worked on fiction podcasts for Netflix. So that type of experience is something she has in common with her colleague, the wonderful Matt Patterson, also at Audible, a scripted development executive. And Matt has acquired and developed hit series such as Skybound's Impact Winter, James Patterson's The Guilty. Any relationship, Patterson? Just realize that.
No
anyway, sorry. Matt has worked as a television producer and writer, setting up projects with Peacock, Hulu, and MGM, just little places like that. So we literally have the experts on scripted fiction here. Martha, thanks again, everybody, for being here. Take it away.
Thank you to the wonderful Amanda, whose energy I wish I could tap. So hi, Ann. Hi, Matt. We'll just jump right in. I think we're talking about fiction today. And I know that you guys have deep knowledge on this. And I guess I'd ask a very general question about what these folks who are listening today appreciate about audio fiction as opposed to TV, print, or film. What's special? Ann, let's start with you.
I mean, the thing that I think is incredibly exciting about audio fiction is, we always talk about the intimacy of podcasting, but I think what's really fun about audio fiction is that you can really get into the mind of characters, your fictional characters, in ways that can sometimes feel a little bit overwrought in other mediums. And also I think that there's still a lot of experimentation to be had in the audio fiction space. So I think that it's one of the ways in which we can really just kind of push the boundaries of what audio fiction means. So
how about you, Matt? Thanks, Ann.
Yeah, I can really relate to that, Ann. I think that in one of the projects I recently developed for Audible, Impact Winter, which was a kind of big vampire action thriller, we found that some of the most successful scenes were sort of the scenes where you got, most in the head of the characters via diary entries and letters between sisters. It was actually kind of tapping into the epistolary format. And so I think that's something fun we've been experimenting with at Audible in particular, is sort of wedding some of the really intimate tropes of the novel to scripted fiction. And yeah, I think, like Ann was saying, that voiceover really does have a place in audio fiction.
And I think, Ann, you had mentioned before when we were talking about homecoming and the use of sounds like peacocks and so on. Can you talk a little bit more about setting that location in sound, in audio?
Yeah, I think one of the things when it comes to scripted fiction, audio fiction, I like to tell people to think about sound as not just like your background for your setting, but to really think about even those ambient sounds as potential plot points. One of the things when I'm teaching a class or a workshop that I like to point out is that in Homecoming, which was a fiction podcast that came out, I think around like 2015, 2016, it's been a while.
Yeah.
There was a peacock in the background of a session where you had two characters who were in a therapy session, and there would just be the sound of this peacock that was kind of in the background and would like interrupt. And that's just kind of seen as, it could be just like an ambient sound, but then later in the show, I think towards like the last episode, that peacock sound comes back and actually is like used in like an awakening moment for the main character, Catherine Keener, in terms of rediscovering like her memory. So I think there are ways in which, and that's what I say, like thinking about the experimentation and the challenges, like challenging ourselves when we're making audio fiction, to not just think about audio as scene setting, but as a way to integrate itself into like the plot points and twists and turns. I'm going to mute myself because it's getting windy out here on my island. I'm in Cherry Grove right now.
No worries. No worries. Matt, we talked a little bit about some of the pitfalls that one might face when dealing with audio fiction. What are some of the, what are some of the most common people fall into, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, I think one tough thing with scripted fiction is sort of, you'll see writers at first almost try to do what they would be doing in sort of audio visual mediums in audio fiction. And so I think, one area, especially in some of these more kind of action and adventure oriented stories, is you'll see kind of action sequences in audio where you almost feel completely blind to what's going on. And even if there's, an incredible score and really amazing sound effects, sometimes, 3D audio, there's just something a bit discombobulating when you're just not seeing anything when so much is happening. And I think I think often with those kind of moments, even though you wouldn't want to do this in TV or film, just having kind of conversations, about the action, or, whether it's, recapping, or just really focusing on dialogue moments within the action, can be so much more effective.
Mm-hmm. And so you're saying, instead of showing a car race, which would be hard to track,
Yeah,
you would want to hear it acted out with the characters.
exactly.
Yeah, interesting. And so what are some of them, both of you, I'd be curious, what are some of the biggest challenges you face when working with writers? If you're the producer, let's say you're the producer, you're the editor, what's some of the challenges, especially if they come from another discipline besides audio?
I think kind of just reorienting them to the fact that people really can't see what's happening. So, a lot of times people will say, a character comes in and they are disheveled, right? Like, so a lot of times visually, like in ways that we think about how a character, might be in distress, or like you would indicate that a character is in distress. We think a lot about that visually, and you just have to think about all of those ways in which how you can show, have a character kind of exemplify who they are by just listening to their voice. And I know Matt and I were talking about this yesterday too. You also have to think about, and I'll let Matt go on more about it, but just the number of people in your scene really, really matters. So to pare it down.
Mm-hmm. Matt, you want to join in?
Yeah. I think that is a good one. I think even more generally, it's just sort of simplicity of storytelling. It really matters in audio. So I think, scenes with too many characters can become confusing, but I think also sort of time jumps, or just sort of really kind of complex or dense narrative can be overwhelming. And so that's one thing I think always encourage in the development process, of just sort of, if there's a way to make the scene simpler, it's always, it's always a good starting point in audio.
It seems like, and we didn't talk about this before, but it seems like science fiction is a very common area for exploration in fiction because, you can create the world and create the characters. And I don't know if either of you've had deep experience with that genre, but what are some of the signs of bad science fiction versus good science fiction, if you can say? Oops, you're muted, Anne.
I would say, it always, I mean, I think it's still with science fiction, like if with the world building, right? Like, so you always just need to make sure that everything is defined, like that your world is like very much defined and you're following the rules of the world, which that's across genres when it comes to bad, like science fiction or bad fantasy. But in audio, and I think, part of the problem is that like in a lot of those, there is a lot of action involved. And so you'll have characters being like, and he's shot, look, they're running down the hall, so you really have to really think about ways that you don't have too much exposition in your dialogue, so I think there's that. But there's really, really fun science fiction to be audio science fiction, out there that can be
Sure.
fun and playful.
Sure. Matt, you have any-
Yeah, I think one other thing, and I think this applies to sci-fi, but other genres too, which is naturalism of performances. I think that, you'd think without visuals that almost like, oh, you really want to, put a spin on dialogue in a way to kind of like, create tone. But I find that sort of without any visuals, sort of, dialogue or performances that are sort of anything beyond naturalistic can really stand out and be distracting and feel really broad. I think with sci-fi, especially, sometimes it can sound the dialogue like too sort of almost movie-like and I think that's one thing we really focus on with our directors is sort of zeroing in on really grounded performances. And I think that in audio, even more than film and TV, it's so important.
Sorry,
I wanted to go on just a little bit about that too. So something that I think about, like if I don't know if like, does Orson Welles' War of the Worlds count as science fiction?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think about that a lot, and it made me think about like the opening for Impact Winter is that like, so I always talk about how our ears have evolved and not like, and we're accustomed to things being like nonfiction sound has like a particular purpose, and that needs to be carried over into fiction, right? So our documentaries and all of the things that we listen to have different, I call them palettes of sound. So like if you have sound of something that's like supposed to be like an Instagram story, that's very curated. If something is supposed to be coming from a Facebook Live video, that's very like raw and action oriented. And I encourage people to not do everything in the studio if possible, because that's not how how we have documentaries. Like the thing that has to be overcome in fiction is that the listener has to believe in that world, and that's one of the hardest things. And if the person who's listening just imagines a studio, that's one of the hardest things to overcome. It's why true crime is so sexy. It's the true part that makes it really, really sexy,
Right.
so you have to have people believe. So it's like, have messy audio, like think about using a Zoom recording calls or phone tape, or something that's like, I don't know, in the street. Just like think of audio and the texture of the quality of the audio as a palette.
Yeah, great. I see questions rolling in. I have one other question, and then we'll get to the audience. At this recent podcast movement conference, I spoke about the future of audio, podcasts in particular. And one of the areas that we discussed, and we only sort of scratched the surface of, and I'd really be interested in both your responses, especially you, Matt, because you've worked with an author who has written to the form of 3D audio, Atmos, Dolby. with Impact Winter, and I don't see a lot of it. I'm curious whether you think the form is moving in that direction, and so what are some of the obstacles for producers, writers in thinking about this form, and what should they be thinking about? And that's a lot of questions. So I'm sure Ann.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, so on Impact Winter, I worked with this amazing creator who wrote it and directed it, Travis Beacham, who wrote Clash of the Titans. And one of the key things on that in terms of the 3D audio was he was just so involved from the outset. And so it really was written into the script itself. And I think he avoided some pitfalls that I sometimes see with the kind of, binaural 3D, Atmos recording, which is he was so subtle in how he used it. And so I think, it can often, when used sort of, for prolonged periods and in intense action sequences, can be a little distracting or can sometimes even feel like a gimmick. But the way he used it was, really subtly. Like I think one of my favorite examples of it in Impact Winter is, we have 3D audio in the sequence where we're just sort of surprised by this, flock of birds that explodes during this kind of quiet moment. And so it ends up being really immersive and kind of intense. And there were maybe around 10 moments, throughout Impact Winter, sort of like that, of just relatively subtle moments that just completely brought you into the world, but that, weren't in any way overwhelming or distracting.
Mm-hmm. And do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I just always say it's like it always still comes down to story, right? Like, so if people get too wrapped up into like the 3D element or whatever, it's like you can't put too much lipstick on a pig, right? So it's always fun to do, but if you really want to think about your story first and think about sound as well and integrating that. But if you have bad story, you can't sound design your way out of that.
Right. Amen. So let's take some questions from the audience. One is on how publishers, and I guess that means us, distributors, like to receive audio fiction queries. Is it different between how you'd pitch audio fiction or a novel to a publisher? Thoughts?
I mean, I would say, the thing is that if you have a good description of the series, character list, that's really good. And then I think, one thing that in terms of being able to get it, the thumbs up and to go forward is that at least I feel like you need at least a pilot script or at least the first 10 pages to see how the writing is, because somebody can have a great story. And then the question is great story, but can you write it? And
right.
You write for audio. So I think any kind of sample pages are really helpful. It doesn't have to be an entire pilot. People have delivered pilots. But at least, a good example of the writing.
Yeah. Matt, do you feel about story Bibles are important in fiction as a first foray to you, or is it more what Ann is saying, just sort of the story concept and some samples?
I think it can be both. And so, we sort of develop content in a couple ways in Acquire, where we'll, acquire sort of the entire series outright. And in that case, definitely want a really detailed Bible and just a sense of exactly where the story is going, even potentially where it could go in sort of, subsequent installments. But we also are doing sort of more almost TV pilot style development now as well. And in that case, it really is more just about the concept and maybe a writing sample, knowing sort of, how the writer writes, what their tone is. And then from there, we'll sort of, develop that pilot together.
Right.
So yeah, it can go either way.
Right. And just to clarify, so, an independent who doesn't have a lot of money might have a great idea, and we would work on what we call a step development deal, where we would sort of go through some steps and some of you on here I think are already doing it, to develop a pilot, so that we can together discover if that partnership works for us. So that's us specifically. So second question, that first one was from John Gaunt. The second one is from Michael Kazbrzik. I can't say her name. What do you think about translating audio fiction into some languages? Which countries' languages do you consider worth investing?
I mean, I think it'd be great. I don't know, Martha, you might be able to talk more about like Audible Global and how that works. I haven't done too much of that. There is outside Audible, if anybody wants to listen to or see, Radio Atlas is pretty great on the independent side to see a lot of audio. It's subtitled in English, but like that's not the Audible side. But yeah, I would love to have everything translated and listen to stuff everywhere. So
well, I'll just say briefly that we have bureaus, if you want to call them, around the world, Brazil, Japan, Europe, Canada, Mexico, and we are doing what we call localization of content, not for everything, but for select offerings, both documentaries as well as fiction. Matt, I don't know if Impact Winter is going into multi-language or not.
Yeah, we are planning on sort of doing more localizing with Impact Winter in the future.
Great. Anonymous attendee, what recent non-audible fiction podcast has really impressed you recently?
I don't know if it's super recent, but I really like this podcast called This Sounds Serious, which is they've done, like, everybody always pretends they're like, we're gonna be the next Serial. For some reason, I've totally loved that's the only parody of Serial that I've actually really enjoyed, and they have subsequent seasons. So, but that's my taste, I thought it was funny. This Sounds Serious.
Matt, do you have any faves?
Yeah, I thought that Batman Unburied was so cool. Such a great twist on sort of the Bruce Wayne character, and just really kind of lush, beautiful audio. So that was one of my favorite recent.
I guess you have a producer of that series here in the audience. So congrats. Let's see. Oh yeah, the question about Impact Winter, was it recorded in the UK? It has a very BBC style quality, stereo miking techniques, less close mics, etc.
Yeah, so it actually was recorded in a UK studio, but essentially by a US team who just sort of loves that kind of UK style, audio fiction so much, and was kind of sort of like a love letter to those recording techniques. And
we are working on a second season, is that right?
Yeah, we are. Yes, that is right.
I also should say, Anne is working on something by Night Vale, who had a very large following. It's called Unlicensed. It's been in the press, so we can talk about it. And you want to just maybe talk a little bit about the process there, not so much about maybe the product itself, or
I'm really excited. So, I've been a fan of Night Vale since the beginning. The guys actually came to my Sarah Lawrence class, and I paid them like $125. So I've known Joseph and Jeffrey for a long time, since 2013, I think. Like, this is their 10-year anniversary. So they were really excited to come and work at Audible, and for us to work together, because one of the reasons I came to Audible was because of its fiction, its depth of fiction. But working with them has been really great. They're very I see like a question about like a narrator. They're very narrative heavy, but they're such good storytellers. And I think it goes back to, again, like the basis of just being really strong storytellers. Because I remember I come from, I kind of grew up in public radio, and a lot of my stuff was a lot more sonically complicated. And I do remember when they came to my class, they're like, yeah, we just use a Blue Yeti and like, that's it. And I just remember just being like, you're kind of undoing what I'm teaching my students right now. But they, it's simply, again, it's just like getting back fundamental to the story, and they're on it. They're so good. So I'm really, really excited for this. That's going to be coming out in November, on November 10th. So
Great. So Malakay Wade asked this question: what are your thoughts on having a narrator character, and how would you write, produce, direct so that it's a good balance and doesn't feel like a crutch for storytelling? And you answered that somewhat. Matt, do you have thoughts on it? Because I think that's a really excellent question, especially in fiction. It can be so awkward, I think, at times.
Yeah, I think it's true. I mean, I think I see it a little bit more, though, almost like first person narration in a novel when done well. So unlike kind of TV or film where it can just be so jarring and where it's sort of feels like a crutch and it's taking you out. I think that there's just something so much more natural about it in audio. I think especially one thing I'm kind of playing around with and we're doing more at Audible is sort of projects that kind of structurally really are a melding of sort of fiction and audio fiction. And some of the most sort of promising things I have in development are with novelists who are sort of dipping their toes into scripted fiction for the first time. And so in that case, it's actually not only kind of narration heavy, but even feels a little prose heavy with then kind of moments of really intimate scene work. And so yeah, I think it can be an awkward balance, but I think with the right writer, you can really push toward the narration and the voiceover and not be afraid of it being a crutch at all.
Yeah.
say if you just find yourself like it's all like you just have to know why you're doing it at that moment. If part of the reason you're doing it is because you don't feel like you can write the dialogue, then maybe you need to just go back in and work on the dialogue rather than just all of a sudden going into like a narrator. Like your narrator voice isn't going to be able to fix everything, and if that's the reason like you're using it, then you really want to go back and like work on the dialogue and other things.
Like sound design, it can't fix the basic problems. I've been working on a docudrama that is fictional, so it has some of the same challenges, and we had a voiceover, and then I brought in basically a script doctor to help me figure out what was going on. And one of the things he said was every scene, not just the whole series, should have hope and fear. What's happening in every scene, and if you can get your characters to experience that tension in every scene, then that will keep the drama lively dramatically. And I thought that was just a really great insight into how to keep the story moving along. And I don't know if you have little tropes like that, Matt or Ann, in terms of editing or thinking about it. Just don't want to put you on the spot, but do you have thoughts about like little tricks of the trade you use when editing scenes, or no?
I mean, I think one, actually, this is one of my favorite sort of writing pieces of advice. It's from the South Park creators, but I think it can really apply to kind of editing audio fiction too, and scene work is this idea that when you have two scenes together in a transition between those scenes, you never want to have sort of a and then where you're just kind of piling a new story element. You want to have a thus or a but, and so that's something that I find at the writing stage I think about, but also at the editing stage where sometimes we'll be able to actually make the edit itself, or maybe even do a pickup is just looking for more dynamic connections between scenes.
And any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, to me, always like the thing that I always try and push people towards is like, what's the subtext of the conversation, particularly like with the dialogue. Like they should be able to articulate not just what is happening like in the ear, but what the subtext is underneath. And like the subtext sometimes should be like more interesting than what's like actually being heard. Like you should always know the subtext of what's being said when you're doing dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Another question from Ann Steven. What is the typical budget on an audio fiction series? Matt, you probably I mean, I know they vary wildly in our universe, but do you care to venture a guess on that?
Yeah, I think I would say it really is so wide. I think, you'll see audio fiction budgets that can be, as low as, very low six figures, to certain high budget ones. I think can push, more toward $1 million or something like that. So I think there's not a typical budget for us. So we have such kind of a wide range of sort of content and budget, so it can be all over the place.
And I would say that if you attach stars to those budgets, the zeros start multiplying at the end of the paycheck. So that's, if you have people you think are going to be great fits for this and you have an in or know somebody who would be interested, then of course pitch away with that person. That doesn't always sell the ideas, as I always try to make clear. The story is really the star, and I think we're really open-minded about that, so that's to underlie it. Got a question from Jose de Urquidi. He's saying, this is a long question. Do you believe non-Hispanic audiences are ready for fiction podcasts in English showcasing the migration drama Central Americans face on their way to the US? So that's one question. This is regarding Hispanic Heritage Month.
I've there've been definitely I like the idea of this kind of bilingual podcast. One of the stories that we're working on with the development program, the writer is a first generation Mexican migrant, and the family very much reflects that. And we did what I call, if you also listen to James Kim's Moonface, he does this really well, where the grandmother is speaking in Korean, the mother is speaking in Korean, the son, can kind of understand what's happening, but then with the dialogue, you understand. If you don't speak Korean, you understand. So I really like that. I think of it Moonface or Jane the Virgin, where you had the grandmother who was speaking in Spanish and they had subtitles. We can't use subtitles, so you have to think about it creatively how you're doing that. There was a KCRW podcast, came out a couple of years ago, a bilingual podcast that was in the telenovela, but I think you're asking more for a specific plot point line. And I do think that non-Hispanic audiences are ready for that. And I know we're excited about that. It just depends on if it's a good story,
Yeah.
So that's the main thing.
Yeah, the follow-up to this question is, what if the voices are from Latinos? It's English as a second language, but the narrator is a non-Hispanic native English speaker. I think I'll take this one because, have some insight into Latino localization, and we are going to be talking about this in November as well, specifically. I think, the measure for us is if no matter what language you're coming from, if English is your second language, if an average American or English speaking person can't really understand you, it's not going to work. And so it's better to figure out, either have voiceover on the foreign language that's being spoken, or have a narrator try to piece together what's happening. It doesn't mean that if English is your second language that we can't understand, that we don't want that, period. No, because a lot of people who speak English as a second language speak English very, very clearly. So it's really depends on the measure of how comfortable it is for an American native speaker to listen. I don't know if you guys would agree or have any disagreements with that statement. Seems not. Let's see. So Patrick Lockwood says, what are your thoughts on a fiction narrative podcast that includes song breaks like a musical? Have you ever heard that done well?
Yeah, I mean, it's a contentious topic in my household, but I really liked 36 Questions from 2 Up Productions. My partner did not, but you know, like I think a lot of people liked it and I thought it was done really well. I'm trying to think there was another kind of more musical podcast.
There was, and I'm trying to remember it too, and it was great, I thought, but it was done probably like 5 years ago. Uh,
The one with James Cameron Mitchell, I can't
Yeah.
remember the names now. There aren't
We-
like enough. I'm a big musical fan, right? So I think part of it is if you like musicals, there you go. And you know, Welcome to Night Vale kind of like made their name a little bit with their like song break, you know, and they use that to their advantage where they just like have the song break and then like they completely like take you into a different direction, like things are solved like after the song. So yeah, I think it can work, you know, but again, it just has to be good. Like you're just adding another layer of what has to be good. The music has to be good, the singing has to be, you know, good.
Great, there's some recommendations in the chat about other examples, so check those out. Let's see, John Gaunt, what's same different between how you'd market an audio fiction title versus an audio doc, opinion, personality driven show? How we'd market that? It's not really our forte, but Matt, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think one thought would just be that, you know, their audiences are sort of so used to more, you know, nonfiction podcasts at this point, and so there is still, I think, a little bit of education to be done in terms of sort of just making people more aware of the format, and so I think that would be one difference.
Yeah, I mean, they're very different. I mean, we have whole marketing teams that think about this stuff, and I think the main difference is thinking about this is a fiction, this is nonfiction, what do you expect? What color do you want today? You know, and if you're more interested in fiction, then those audiences will be paying attention. So we don't have the most sophisticated filter here, but folks in our company do. Louise Buckins, is your experience that audio fiction with multicast demands a little more from its listeners? Do they listen as long as traditional studio podcasts or one narrator stories? What's your general experience about how long each episode should be? It's a good question. Matt, you want to take a stab?
Sure. I mean, in terms of the episode length, you know, I think we find there's a sweet spot around sort of 25 minutes, you know, around there. But I also think we really encourage writers to kind of break out their episodes any length that feels right to the story. And I think we're also doing kind of experimenting with sort of almost like audio movies, if you will, where we're not actually kind of always breaking out into episodes. And I think, and then also sort of doing projects that feel a little more novelistic, where, you know, you'll feel like you're having really short chapters that might be 10 minutes or so. So I think one of the advantages of the fact that, you know, audio fiction is still a little bit of a Wild West is that I think everyone can really play with different formats and lengths still.
Yeah, I think on the doc side anyway, and Anne can disagree with me, but I think 6 to 8 episodes typically is the sweet spot for us. I don't know, in the historic history of things I've produced, things that gone on to 13 episodes seem like a lot to ask the listener. However, it doesn't mean that if it's a really good podcast, they're not going to stick with it. So I think, you know, we're getting more data on that, but again, I think to Anne's and Matt's points, if the story is really excellent, people are going to stick with it no matter whether it's fiction, nonfiction, you know, or a book, for example. So it's a good question, though. For those of us from Anonymous, quote, completely uninitiated in the development process, what is the entry point for a step development deal? Is it a query letter to one of the presenters or someone like them? And what should that include? Anne, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically just like a general pitch. You just give us, you know, a description of what the story is. Also, you know, where you think the story is going to go. I think Martha, you can, I think like if you had a couple of pages just to show how your writing is, and then we would make the decision, you know, to take it to our meeting as like a step development deal, working with that. And then the step development deal is basically creating a pilot.
Yeah.
So-
Matt, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I don't think so. I think, Ann, I think you nailed it.
Yeah, I mean, I will just say, and I've said this at some of the talks, that when you're pitching, you should be very aware of what else in the genre or in the story realm is out there, and who's done it perhaps better. And if they have, then why is yours something we should pay attention to? So know the competition, I guess, is always a piece that I give, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. I tend to do more nonfiction, and does sort of both, and Matt does purely fiction, I think. So we do appreciate short, well-researched, meaning, you know, you've done your homework, well-crafted sentences. It doesn't have to be a ton of audio, but sometimes I get ideas pitched to me, but hey, what do you think about this idea? And it's yada, yada, yada. And that's kind of a waste of my time, because clearly you haven't spent a lot of time developing it. So spend the time and, you know, bounce it off your friends or teachers or whomever. So that's something I would press. So let's see, I think following on the budget question from Lena Presswood, how would somebody even begin to think about budgeting a fiction project? Seeing so many A-lister names, i.e. Rachel Brosnahan, involved, makes me wonder just what fees for writers, talent, etc. are commanding in the podcast space. Matt?
I mean, I think in terms of a breakdown, just, you know, you think your major cost centers are going to be, you know, acting talent, writing, directing, and then you know, sound design, engineering, and then administrative costs, sometimes sort of producer attachment costs too. But I think in general, I mean, one thing to think about is just where you're allocating those resources. And I think that, you know, spending more toward writing, you know, can always help, just having that foundation of a truly strong story to begin with.
What would an A-list writer on average get in Hollywood these days, or Hollywood plus, meaning audio?
Yeah, I feel like could really range, pretty wildly. I mean, I think yeah, it's you know, again, could be sort of low six figures to just, you know, to much more than that.
Yeah, with some zeros on the end. Yeah, I mean, again, it also depends on the length too. So if you're pitching a shorter series, you know, you might get away with 50, 75K. Those are for fairly well-known writers, right, Matt? I mean, if you're trying to develop someone as a writer, you could do better than that. But again, they're not necessarily proven as writers. So looking at the clock, yeah, let's see. What else? Julian Ambler, how do you differentiate your stories in the audio fiction space when you guys are looking at a potential series? What are the first things you look at beyond story that might distinguish a series? What are you looking at for creators that don't always look? What are you looking out for that creators don't always manage to address? Anne, do you want to try that one?
That's a little hard. I mean, it's hard to say, like, what are the first things you look at beyond story? Because story to me is so central, I guess. So, and if the story is like, if it feels like it's fresh, if it feels like it's a new take, if it is like an audience that we haven't really like heard from a lot or addressed, you know, think about those things a lot in terms of the like who you're imagining your audience to be. You know, if you're trying to go for like a Gen Z, you know, or younger audience, like that's something that I think doesn't happen a lot. So, but fundamentally, it's like, to me, it's always central, like story. That's always the most fundamental thing.
Are we at
And I would say, like, what are you looking out for that creators don't always manage to address is sometimes they think more about like the theme and the casting and don't think about the story enough.
Uh-huh.
So to me, fundamentally, if you just focus on story, that's your golden ticket.
Great. One or two more questions, she says. Let's see, Kevin Barry, what is your day-to-day contribution in development work? What is the work relationship with creators like? Is it feedback on outline script scenes? Can you point us to examples, scripts, pitches, or queries that grabbed you, ideally with links? Can you give the same in the form of a show Bible? Matt, you want to?
Yeah, I think, in terms of the day-to-day, it is sort of exactly, Kevin, what you mentioned there in terms of giving notes and sort of, being there to support sort of at every, part of the process. I think that too, with more of our kind of step development oriented projects, I think that's where we're can be a little bit more of a collaboration of just, really being there as a sounding board as creators are sort of, ideating. But then beyond that, it's acquiring the project itself and then giving notes at every stage, and then notes on the audio as well.
Yeah, I think that's great. What do you, Kevin follows up with, what do you love in audio drama and what are you looking for right now?
I love things that make me laugh. I think everybody's talking about escapism like at this point. So for me, you can make me laugh. Yay. I like thinking, and we have one of the step developments that we're working on that I was talking about earlier. Like, it's essentially like really funny, but it also has like the backdrop of a first generation Mexican American, and then it like feels very like youthful and fun. I don't know, like you can have kind of like heavy background topics happening with also just an element of playfulness in it. So to me, if it feels playful and fun, that's what I'm excited about right now.
Matt?
Yeah, I think for me too, people often talk about how, avoiding any moments in audio that are sort of confusing. I think because you don't have that visual element. But I think that kind of confusion used really well can also work. I mean, I think about Homecoming and how key that was. So one thing I'm always looking for is kind of a mystery box audio thriller where you're really not sure about the entire world you're following for a while. And I think writers who can sort of pull that off are great, and that's something I'm always wanting to develop more of.
Great. I think we have time to squeeze in these last two. Will you be focusing on non-English podcasts and Audible, for instance, in the Scandinavian market? I don't know. I'd have to ask my European colleagues there. How do you measure the success of shows? That's a great question. Ann, do you want to take a stab? You wish you knew.
Yes, I wish, I mean, to me, in terms of how I measure the success of a show, I don't know, is if I'm proud of it, I guess, if I feel like it's done really well. There are lots of podcasts in the podcasting universe, whether it be out in the wild or from, not behind a paywall, like that, I think, I don't know, like people always talk about reviews and listener numbers and whatever, but like there've been definitely some podcasts that blow me away that I know don't have a ton of listeners,
Right.
So
Right. Matt, you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, one cool thing with Audible in particular, we have sort of such an engaged community on the platform. And so that's one way I definitely measure success is just, we have so many reviews we can read and sort of ratings and that part of the process, getting all that very direct feedback I find really exciting, informative.
Yeah, and we do have metrics. We evaluate things, but we're still trying to figure it out. Podcasting it's not that old, so we're still trying to figure out what our metrics are, and we definitely know when something's successful, but we also will put forward things that, to Ann's point, that we think are really high quality that didn't get the listenership, and we want to cycle it through again because we think it's a success. So it's an amorphous answer. Sorry about that, but it is still an amorphous business, I think, a bit. But it's been really fun. I urge you guys to tell your friends about these because I think they are a good resource for folks who are either have been in the business or want to get into it. And there's Amanda. Hello.
Oh my gosh. I have to say, this has been, as expected, such an exciting and really dynamic discussion. I can't think of a time when we had such a heated, amazing, passionate, not heated, excuse me, fire is what I was trying to look for. Gen Z, old millennial, Gen X, or I don't know the lingo anymore. But such a great chat. Everybody in here has been wonderful. And I just, in this last minute, I have a question for y'all. If I am telling somebody that scripted fiction is where it's at, give me a pitch on why this is going to be the genre to be creative and enjoy creating. And if you're a podcaster, like looking to start developing scripted fiction.
Matt?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, sure. Yeah, I think, I think to me, it is just the ability to combine kind of everything we love about TV and film and sort of that sort of scene work with more intimacy and with more sort of like really intense POV work, really getting into a character's head. So that, to me, that's the part that excites me the most.
And I think if I was encourage anybody who is like creative to do it, there is an element like, there are lots of collaborators, but there is an element where you can, as a creator, really kind of dive into a lot of the different elements of it. If you wanted to take on more, if you wanted to, it's much easier, I think, just to kind of take on some of the elements of the sound design, or at least just kind of like knowing about it. But also you will be torturing yourself. So if you kind of like any creative endeavor, whether you're writing music or novels or short stories or films or whatever. So like if you're into that, go for it. But in the end, you'll love it because you'll be working with really incredible people. And so that's the other thing too, is that audio fiction can be fun and collaborative. And I find that like groups that work collaboratively, people are having the most fun when they are both supporting each other and challenging each other. So
right. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks
I love
again.
it. These are such a wonderful questions. And Martha has been so generous because Martha, you talk to a lot of folks at Podcast Movement Booth. So I want to thank you again for just being such a wonderful board member and helping to pull this amazing discussion together. Ann and Matt, you've been fantastic. And I just want to thank everybody here for joining us today. Folks, if you got a lot out of this talk, please give our speakers all a shout out in the chat or on TPA Slack and share your comments on our exit survey. I'm dropping all this text here into the chat. I'm just going to reiterate this for people who are just listening. As mentioned on the top of the event, we have more like this in our programming schedule, and not for nothing, scripted fiction is where audio, our state of the art, amazing production is happening. And we do happen to have a panel on working with an audio team, why you should work with these folks if you want to up level your podcast production quality. So the RSVP link is right there in that wonderful vanity link. If you have issues with it, just send us an email. TPA members will have access to this and all past recorded events by going into our membership portal, go to resources, and you'll see recorded events, and it should show up in a couple of business days. I do encourage everybody who isn't a member, thank you so much for being here. We consider you a valuable voice in podcasting. We're trying to include accessibility. I really want to thank somebody who mentioned that the other thing about podcasting is that it's very inclusive. So if you have visual impairments, this is a really great genre, and the inclusion of YouTube is giving folks with hearing impairments or assistance needs the ability to see the language in a very dynamic live experience with some really fun visuals to accompany. So this is such a great art form and medium for creativity. So again, I want to thank everybody so much for being here. It is the top of the hour. We are so thankful again for Martha and Ann and Matt. Going to give you a nice visual applause here. And I'm going to end this recording now, but thank you again so much, and have a great fall. Happy September. Happy first day of fall. Right? Something like
Thanks,
that.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye, everybody.